AskReddit. Reddit, what mystery or unexplained phenomena made you go what the duck? In 9th grade, I was playing hooky and staying at home. For some strange reason, I decided to do laundry, which I never did back then. The washer was in the basement, so I go downstairs to move the clothes. I was just about to go to the yard to hang them up when a distinct and clear voice tells me, "Stop, don't go outside." I was alone, so my instinct was to get the duck out of the basement. I move and the voice again says, "Stop." So I stop and I look out the basement window to see a strange man with a gun in the narrow space between my house and my neighbors, skulking and looking around. I stayed in the basement until someone came home. To this day, I have no idea who told me to stop. My mom was making breakfast one morning for my brothers and I, and we were just hanging in the kitchen talking. Her dad had been very sick in the hospital with cancer for a year or so at this point. Suddenly she lets out this blood-curdling scream and grabs her head and starts moaning, and falls to her knees crying and holding her head saying it hurt so bad, and she just panted and rocked, and we had no idea what to do. We were so scared and shocked. She finally sits down and leans against the cabinets, and she had tears running down her face and she apologized. She didn't know what happened. Then the phone rings. My grandma had just found my grandpa, who had been released from the hospital, still very sick, in his office, dead. He shot himself through the temple. Still gives me willies to think about. My uncle never had a chance to meet him. Hired a small yacht with a small group of friends and were going to use it to do sailing holidays as a business. Anyway, they radioed in very early one morning saying they were out of petrol off the coast and were told they would receive petrol in the morning. They went to deliver petrol and never found the boat. They have only ever found one life donut thing and that's it. They think the boat was pirated, and we have reports that they are still alive in different countries, but they've never been substantiated. They also have a sneaking suspicion that the yacht owner had something to do with it, as he acted so dodgy after it all went down. They literally have absolutely no idea what happened. There were no other ships in the area at the time. They thought they could have been run over and sunk by a large ship. Anyway, it is called the Patanala. There is still a huge reward out for any info. I don't talk about this often, but I think about it a lot, and seeing the amount of people discussing their missing family members, it's applicable. I was too young to be told these things, but my mother told me much later about her now ex-husband's tear-filled confession. My stepfather was an illegal arms dealer overseas. My mother didn't know anything other than he left for business, and he made sure to keep it that way either for her safety or because she would have left him. I don't know which one. The money was good, and I don't think she wanted to rock the boat tbh. One night he confessed to being in Africa for some shady deal and seeing a caged group of white women kidnapped from the US. They were slated to be sold. There was nothing he could have done. As the story unfolded, he admitted to seeing multiple camps like that in multiple parts of the world. I think about them a lot, the women he wouldn't or couldn't save, and how many others have had the same fate in the last 3 decades, since he told my mother. When I was 13 or so, my mother and I were driving along a 2-lane country road when she said, "Do you smell that?" I didn't smell anything. "It's a cigar. It's one of my grandfather's cigars. Keep an eye out, every time I smell it something happens." Less than 10 seconds later an oncoming car crossed the center line, and she had to swerve onto the shoulder to avoid being hit head on. My great-grandmother was in hospital and died because my great-grandfather was elderly and it was 2 a.m. They rang their daughter, my grandmother, to go and break the news to my grandfather. So, at 2 a.m., my mother and my grandmother head over to his house to find him up, dressed, coat on, hat on, waiting for them. "Oh, did the hospital call you already?" "No, my wife just came and saw me, told me you were on your way to take me to say goodbye to her body." Utterly true, and always gives me chills when I think about it. My cousin dropped her kids off at daycare 11 years ago and was never seen again. Her face has been plastered all over my state. She's been on countless news segments and was even featured on the missing persons segment of America's Most Wanted. Then a few years back her name came up in a torture case where the guy threatened to put his victim in the same hole he put Melanie in. Her case is still no closer to being solved. Missing persons cases really get to me. The idea of never knowing what happened to someone is awful. I hope that one day your cousin's whereabouts are found out. The creepiest one I've heard of is an old man's car broke down on a rural road and he was hiking to the nearest house/gas station. The guy calls his wife on his cell phone, and while on the phone he is abducted and the wife is just listening as her husband is kidnapped. That was the last she ever heard of her husband, and he still hasn't been found. Imagine having to listen to that and it be the last thing you ever hear of someone, let alone your spouse. My dad has told me this story a few times. Sometime in the 50s or 60s some of his cousins had gathered together at their parents' house after their mother unexpectedly passed away in that same house just days prior. One of the cousins, upon crossing the threshold entering into that house, suddenly had a heart attack and died. Of course this was incredibly shocking and tragic, considering that not only the mother, but now one of her sons had passed in the same week. The family then has another gathering at the same house. After a few hours of having the family together in the living room, one of the brothers of the recently deceased cousin clutches his hands to his chest, pretending to have a heart attack. Apparently this cousin was known for his morbid sense of humor, so this, while in bad taste, wasn't out of the ordinary for him. But he wasn't joking. That cousin also had a heart attack and died in the exact same room that his brother died in the same house that his mother died in, all in roughly a week's span. The Tamam Shud case. Aka the Somerton man. Unknown man was found dead in Australia, apparently poisoned but no trace of poison in his body. A single scrap of paper was found in his clothing, torn from a very rare poetry book, containing one phrase, Tamam Shud, which means finished in Persian. The book with the missing phrase was later found, and it had a code written on the page, where the phrase was torn out. Nobody has ever solved the code. People have speculated he was a spy, but nobody really knows. Was about 17 and learning to drive. Mom and I had just been to the grocery and running a few errands. It was almost dark out and we were heading home. Was first in line at a left turn stoplight in a large intersection. The turn arrow light turned green and I just sat there. It was a very odd sensation. I knew the light was green and needed to pull through, but couldn't. It was like all motivation to move was gone. Almost like when you're staring off into space, but I was fully conscious that the light had changed and turning was what I was supposed to be doing. Mom didn't say a word either, just stared at the light. About 5 seconds later, a full-size Suburban came barreling through the red light. The speed limit on the road was 45, but he had to have been doing 65 to 75. The car shook hard when he passed us. After he ran the light, I turned like normal and Mom and I both kind of woke up. Afterward, we both described the same feeling coming over us at the light. If we hadn't both been tranced out, or what have you, the Suburban would have struck us broadside. A Suburban vs a Saturn at 60 to 70 miles per hour wouldn't have been pretty. Mom would have probably been killed on impact, and I highly doubt I would have survived as well. We still talk about it every now and then. Just a weird experience. Just had my dad refresh this story for me about his cousin. So in the early 1990s, my dad's cousin Jimmy worked for the CIA. He seems to recall he dealt with some sort of political espionage in South America. He held a cover job in Boston at a media outlet covering South American politics, writing stories not on air talent or anything. One day, Jimmy calmly tells his boss that his mother is sick and has to leave work and is never heard from again until he was found dead in Washington, D.C. and ruled a suicide, which, according to everyone who knew him, seemed extremely unlikely. This was followed by weird phone calls from the government to his family with stories trying to justify the suicide. None of it really made sense, and to this day, nobody knows what he was really into or what happened. I was at a dueling piano bar with my girl for a night of laughing. This girl my age, and who I figured was her mom, kept looking at me. The night went on, and they eventually came up to me and apologized for the staring, and had decided to explain to me why. The old lady told me her daughter had taken her out to this piano bar tonight to celebrate her now deceased husband's birthday. that I was a perfect match and looked exactly like her husband and was the same age for when they met decades ago. They asked me my name and age. When I told them, they both started crying as I had the same name as the husband and was the same age as when they met. They kept saying they wish they had a picture with them to show me the resemblance. The old lady and daughter asked me to please take a pic with them so they could document this and to have the pic to show the rest of family this, as nobody would believe this happened. They were pretty emotional about this happening, and the old lady almost pulled some tears out of me when she asked me to hug her, because it was like she was going back in time and was given the chance to hug her husband once again. The daughter, to her this was like seeing her father in his prime, and they were both blown away. I couldn't say no to the pic and hug, etc. The whole thing was very strange and really got me thinking about life, etc. I'm a tad emotional right now thinking about this again. I've posted this before, but I don't mind sharing it again. When my sister and I were kids, we were out front of our home, playing near the mailbox. Mom and dad were there by the window watching, and according to them, my mother turned to my father and asked him to bring us inside. He shrugged her off, but she became more urgent. He asked why it was a problem, and she suddenly panicked and started heading towards the front door despite being less than a week away from giving birth to our youngest sister. He stopped her and stepped outside to call us in, and we complied. Less than a minute later, a car came barreling down the street at high speed and struck our mailbox, destroying it. We would have both been killed instantly. My parents have never felt entirely comfortable talking about it. I don't believe in ghosts, but my dad has told me about a couple of his own experiences. I can't think of a single reason why he would lie to me about it, but the craziest one he told me was from when he was about 16. He was staying the night at his best friend's house, as he had done many times before. Everyone had already gone to bed, and he was watching TV alone in the living room. Then, the TV shut off on its own, and he heard the floor creak like it does when someone walks down the hall. But nobody was there, and then he saw the seat next to him on the couch become depressed, and the TV turned back on, but instead of playing his show it started playing some old black and white cartoons with subtitles. He said at this point he was petrified and couldn't even move. Then the TV shut back off, the seat inflated, he heard steps back down the hall, and his original show he was watching came back on. My dad is driving back from visiting his father in North Carolina. We live about 12 hours away, and he plans on driving straight through. When he pulls over at the first rest stop, a guy walks up and asks for a ride. Dad turns him down. 2 hours later he sees the same guy hitchhiking on the side of the road. He drives past. Dad stops at a rest stop for a coffee. The man is there and asks for a ride as far as you're going, but dad still says no. Sees the man again hitchhiking on the road. Dad's car starts to have trouble, and he pulls off the highway. At the end of the ramp, yup, that guy again. He offers to help with the car and together they get it running again. Dad offers him a ride this time. The man doesn't talk, and they drive for a few hours. Next thing, dad wakes up in the hospital. The doctor says he passed out at the wheel and witnesses saw his passenger take over the wheel, pull the car over. When they stopped to help, though, the passenger wasn't there. It was back in high school. We were in the middle of class listening to a lesson when my vision went pitch black for a second. I assumed the lights went off, but we had windows. Turns out everyone saw the same thing. Finally the teacher just bursted out saying, "Okay, let's just pretend we all blinked at the same time." Yep, a very memorable WTF moment for me. I had a dream where my dad was fishing with a man in overalls when suddenly some black smoke like monster surged from the woods and impaled him in the heart. Woke up from that dream to a phone call from my stepmother. My father was on the operating table for a heart attack. He'd been smoking since the age of 17, and it nearly killed him at 38. He had 2 more by the age of 41. The kicker? He'd been replacing the toilet when it happened. Had his buddy over to help, a plumber. Hence the man in overalls. I still get chills thinking about it. When I was younger I used to sleep over my best friend's house a lot. He has an enormous and old house which is also quite beautiful. One night, I woke up and went up this long ass stairs to the bathroom while it was all really dark, and I can't start to describe the noises I heard while I was in the bathroom. I heard steps right outside the door, heard someone scratching the door, and I thought this must be my friend pranking me, so I went and opened the door. Nothing, absolutely nothing. The noises stopped suddenly as soon as I opened it. I slept in the bathroom that night and recently told my friend, now that we are older, what happened, and he told me they had their house purged a year ago due to weird things happening, especially with his little sister. To be honest, I don't believe in ghosts nor anything of that kind, but that event was a complete minduck. Exact damn thing happened to me and freaked me out completely. I do not believe in ghosts or anything of the sort. Everything is explainable, I believe, but wow, reading your story made the hair on my neck stand up. We had shit happening in our house for years. Growing up, my oldest sister used to tell my parents about the old lady who would sit on her bed and talk to her at night. They dismissed it as just a child's imagination. A few times when I was growing up, at night, I could feel my bed shaking, more like a rhythmic pull that I could see as it rocked back and forth against the wall. One time I watched my closet door close by itself and then hear a loud bang. I thought maybe the cat had trapped itself inside, so I opened the door and all of my clothes were off the hangers and on the floor, and all the hangers were swinging wildly on the rod. It really scared me. My sisters and I grew up and went to college, got married and had kids of our own. My sister's husband was in the living room one night and looked up the stairs to see an old woman walk right down the hallway and through a door. He was so freaked out that he never went upstairs in my parents' house again. I had forgotten so many of the stories about the house. I went to visit my parents on Thanksgiving. At about 3 AM I got up to use the bathroom. I was sitting on the throne and I heard footsteps come down the hall and stop in front of the door. I watched the door knob turn and I yelled, "I'm in here. Be out in a minute." And someone pushed on the door, as in, leaned on it with some weight to make it move. And again I said, "Hey, I'm in here." I heard a loud sighing and I jumped up, pulled up my clothes, opened the door too. No one. It freaked me the hell out. I went down the hall and checked every room. Turned on all the lights. I checked my son who was still asleep, then woke up both my parents and told them someone is in this house. There was no one. A few years after that, my father broke into a boarded up crawl space in the basement and there was a trunk filled with papers in it. There was a letter from a previous owner who wrote to his lawyer about wanting to sell the house for fear it was haunted. True story. One night, while away at college, I had a crazy bad stomachache. I was so pale and sweating so profusely that another guy in my dorm demanded to take me to the local hospital. I was quickly diagnosed with appendicitis and the doctors said they would likely need to remove my appendix. They ordered blood tests to confirm, but were confident I would need immediate surgery. I was horrified. While waiting for the test results, the pain abruptly stopped. Kind of like when you remove a splinter and suddenly feel whole again, just to a greater degree. I told the doctor I felt fine and wanted to leave, but he kept insisting I stay on premises because he was so sure I had appendicitis. Against his judgment, I left the hospital. About an hour after I got home, I got a call from my dad. He said, "I don't want you to freak out, but I just wanted to let you know that your sister had an emergency surgery tonight. She had her appendix removed, but she's doing perfectly fine now." I really believe that I somehow felt her pain up until the point she had surgery. Can't explain it. Buddy had an apartment. We used to hear noises, pounding, knocking coming from a wall in the bathroom. At first it was surprising, but eventually it happened so often that we barely noticed it. One night there were 3 of us in the apartment. We were all in the living room. We heard a pounding sound significantly louder than it had previously been, and it caught our attention. My buddy, whose apartment it was, got up to go and investigate the bathroom. He was standing at the bathroom door, about to walk in, when he noticed one of the burners on the stove in the kitchen was on. He shut it off and came back to the living room. At this point we are all talking about what just happened and trying to scare each other and psych each other out. Eventually we convinced our buddy to take the hit to his security deposit and let us take a hammer to the wall in the bathroom, where we heard the sounds. At this point we thought some sort of animal was maybe nesting in the wall somehow. We put a big hole in the drywall between two of the 2x4s in the wall. We found nothing. Eventually my buddy moved out of the apartment, but a few years after he moved out I was talking to another buddy of mine whose dad had bought the building the apartment is in. We started exchanging stories, and it turns out his dad was remodeling the apartment my buddy used to live in, and during the remodeling process they found human remains inside the wall one segment over from where we put a hole in the wall. I was at scout camp a few years ago. It was lights out, so I went into my tent, where my bunkmate had already been in for a while. He was in his bed, and I whisper, "Hey, I'm back." He then drowsily tells me to shut up. I chuckle to myself, change, and crawl into bed. I'm laying there for a couple minutes waiting for sleep when all of a sudden my mate who was just a minute ago lying in bed burst through the ducking door. We were both like, what the duck just happened? He says all of a sudden he was just outside on the ground. I know for a fact that he didn't get up and walk out. I would have noticed it. He was 2 feet away. I also would have noticed if he fell out. This is the weirdest thing I have ever witnessed. We came to the conclusion that aliens abducted him, but didn't want him so sent him back down. We nicknamed him Roswell. In 4th or 5th grade, we stopped all of our classes for the day. 2 people came into our classroom, a man and a woman, and they didn't say why they were there or where they had come from. They handed out questionnaire booklets that seemed like standardized tests, except for the questions within them, 50 or so questions, all of them true or false format, but with really weird content. Some that I can remember were true or false. Worms talk to trucks and true or false. Apples are blue. We all answered them while looking really confused, and our teachers were silent the entire time. The next days, nobody said a word about the tests. I remember asking people what they were, but nobody could recall where the people were from. We never saw them again, and no faculty of the school ever once mentioned the tests. We didn't have them the next year, and had never had them before. I still have no clue what they wanted from us. I went to visit my family a couple years ago. On my flight back I had a fairly early departure time. I arrived about 45 minutes before my flight, walked up to the ticket counter. The agent smiled at me, handed me my ticket, and wished me a good flight. I did not ask for my ticket. I didn't show them any ID. I hadn't even spoken. They simply handed me my ticket, and it was mine. I went to my gate. I was the first person there. It ended up being a completely full flight. I have absolutely no idea how they knew who I was, or why they had my ticket ready to go. Bothers me every time I think about it.